I call Denise Roach.
Tēnā koe, Mr Speaker.
Tēnā koe.
I rise to take the first call for the Greens on this, the second reading of the Employment Standards Legislation Bill. The bill, as it's been reported back to the House, is quite a different beast to the one that was introduced to the House in its first reading. And by the time we get to the third reading, it may well be a different beast again. As I understand from previous speakers on Labour and both the Minister, that there are discussions underway to strengthen the bill, particularly in the area of 0 hours. At this stage, the Greens will be voting against the bill for this, the second reading, because the devil is always in the detail. And while we've had some communication with the Minister's office, our caucus maintains a strong and unwavering opposition to legislation that enables the exploitation of ordinary working New Zealanders. And this bill, as it's reported back, risks enshrining 0 hour contracts into the law. If, during the committee stage of the procedures for the passage of this bill, the Minister does introduce amendments through supplementary ordinary order papers that outlaw 0 hour contracts, then we will, of course, support that through to the third reading. But as I say, we have to see the detail first. And while I note that some SOPs are being developed, we haven't seen the Minister. I'm just going to talk a bit about the submission process, because this was a very complicated omnibus bill. And so there were over 12,200 written submissions, and the vast majority of them from ordinary working New Zealanders, union members on the whole, who were concerned about the potential to enable 0 hour contracts. And I want to congratulate those people, particularly those union members, for participating in the democratic process and adding their voice to this issue. And I have no doubt that it is the deep unpopularity of the provisions in the bill that is triggering the change of heart in the Minister, which just goes to show that people power does work. So we also heard from employers and from peak bodies of employers, and we heard a significant amount of comment about rostering and part-time workers. And I have to say, there was no real appetite to liberalise employment law to enable 0 hours, as many employers can already manage the peaks and flow of their businesses with part-time, fixed-term, casual and permanent staff. Now, we acknowledge that the bill, as it is being reported back, has tried to address some of the issues around 0 hour contracts, like availability clauses and cancellation of shifts. And these were issues that I had developed, solutions to in a members' bill, which I launched over a year ago, but I pulled it when the Minister announced that he was going to act on the issue, because I thought we would get to a place where we would end these unfair employment practices. But this bill, as it's reported back, requires reasonable notice of shift cancellation and reasonable compensation if employees have to be available, which is much better than what the first iteration of the bill was. But having said that, it also includes tests about what reasonable is, which are really guidelines to the Employment Court to take into consideration when deciding what is reasonable and unreasonable. And I have a difficulty with making laws that need to be tested after a problem with the exploitation of a worker, when we should be making law that prevents exploitation in the first place. These days, it's basically left to a handful of brave workers and their unions to take legal cases to test our industrial relations law. And in the casual workforce, accessing legal remedies to ensure is basically left up to labour inspectors. And anecdotally, I've heard that unless there are lots of workers who are impacted, there's not a lot of likelihood of labour inspectors being able to get out there and actually do the enforcement. You'd need a huge army of them to have a look at every single one. And really, we should be looking at the ability for workers to understand and be able to speak up for their rights. As an individual, though, as an individual waiting at the end of the phone for a call for some hours of work, it's not likely you're going to stand up for them. By the time casual employee waiting at the end of the phone for a call for a zero-hour contract, by the time they take any type of legal action to test the parameters of the availability or cancellation of shifts, the employment relationship is basically over. And so we've heard from some submitters ways that we could end 0 hours. And some of them are just as simple as ensuring that there's a guarantee of minimum hours to be worked in every employment agreement. That would be a very good start. Incentivising permanent and regular employment is another way, and we can do that by adding a casual loading to those who are employed on an on-call basis. And that is the basis of the supplementary order paper that Clayton Mitchell is putting forward from New Zealand First. His supplementary order paper essentially will load about 19% onto the hourly rate, which is similar to what happens in Australia, and that's to cover the fact that casual employees don't get access to some of the other rights that workers have, like holidays, bereavement leave, and sick leave. So while we support the aspects of the bill, we do actually support some aspects of the bill that deal with the enforcement of labour standards. We think that the increase in fines are great, but we are still concerned at the lack of resourcing for the agency charged with doing that enforcement. The Labour Inspectorate does a great job, but they are under-resourced, and one just has to look at the lack of compliance for some of the basic employment standards, like time and wage records in the dairy farming sector that has been reported widely in the media, to get an idea of the scope of the problems that they have to deal with. So we oppose the provisions in the bill as it is reported back around time and wage records for salaried workers. Yes, we need good, strong law around keeping time and wage records, but we're concerned that the way it's reported back, salaried workers will lose protection. We think there's an ill-thought-out recommended change that came through from the Select Committee, and we didn't see that there was any reason to have this dangerous provisions in there. And I will be putting an SOP up to address that issue when it comes to the Committee of the Whole House. There's certain parts of this omnibus bill that we support wholeheartedly. Extending paid parental leave is one of them. And extending paid parental leave to the carers of and after the birth of a preterm baby is also supported, and I want to recognise the work that Sue Moroney has done in this area. So the Greens believe that we should be making laws that support the most vulnerable in our society. In this case, those who are vulnerable are those with no guarantee of basic working hours, who are desperate for paid work and are on the losing side of the power imbalance inherent in the employment relationship. And that power imbalance is outlined in the Employment Relations Act preamble. On this ground, sir, we will not be supporting the bill at this reading, but we will consider it later down the track.